let's consider how much more rich and complex Mansfield Park is than Pride and Prejudice. When you think about it, there are only two fully developed characters in Pride and Prejudice, characters who change and grow in the course of the novel, who learn something about themselves by the end. These characters are, of course, Elizabeth and Darcy. To a much lesser extent, Mr. Bennet and Charlotte also change and grow. Mr. Bennet must come to terms with his failure as a father, and Charlotte must learn how to manage her husband. But the other characters, even major ones like Jane, Bingley, and Wickham, are pretty much flat. Their characters are fixed and change very little in the course of the novel. Elizabeth even tells Bingley that his is not a deep, intricate character. These fixed characters can include kind and wise people like the Gardiners, or foolish people like Mrs. Bennet and Lydia. But we also find in Pride and Prejudice a more extreme sort of fixed character, which Austen has probably borrowed from stage comedy, the caricature. Mr. Collins and Mary Bennet fall into this category. A caricature embodies certain human traits, exaggerated to absurd proportions. Obsequiousness and self-importance, an interesting combination, in the case of Mr. Collins, pedantry in the case of Mary. Caricatures have no self-awareness and hence no capacity for moral growth. They would never be mistaken for real people. Their exaggerated traits are the stuff of laughter, and Mr. Collins is one of the funniest caricatures in English literature. But this poses a problem for Austen, since Mr. Collins has a major scene with the novel's most fully developed and self-aware character. As vividly demonstrated by Jamie and Ryan's performance last month, and those of you who are here couldn't possibly forget it, Collins's proposal to Elizabeth is perhaps the most delightful scene in all of Austen, and no reader would want to change a word of it. But there is no way that either Elizabeth or the reader can take the proposal seriously. There is no possibility that Elizabeth would accept, even if the entire family were facing eviction from Longbourn and only Elizabeth's marriage to Collins could save them from financial ruin. The scene is hilarious, but it lacks any kind of drama. Collins's proposal to Elizabeth poses no threat to Elizabeth's moral well-being. It never causes Elizabeth to consider, even for an instant, whether her family might require a sacrifice on her part. She refuses him without a twinge of conscience. Elizabeth and Collins inhabit entirely different fictional universes. Consider how differently Austen treats Henry Crawford's proposal to Fanny. Crawford, a young man with many appealing qualities, is genuinely in love with Fanny, and his offer of marriage has the enthusiastic backing of Sir Thomas, Fanny's surrogate father. When Fanny tells Sir Thomas that she means to refuse Henry's proposal, the dramatic tension is intense, heightened by Fanny's circumstances. She cannot tell Sir Thomas her reasons for refusing. One would implicate his eldest daughter. To reveal the other is unthinkable. Jamie will now read to us Sir Thomas confronting Fanny.
You are not aware, perhaps, that I've had a visitor this morning. I had not been long in my own room after breakfast when Mr. Crawford was shown in. His errand, you may probably conjecture. Fanny's color grew deeper and deeper. Her uncle, perceiving that she was embarrassed neither speaking or looking up quite impossible, turned away his own eyes, without any farther pause, proceeded in his account of Mr. Crawford's visit. Mr. Crawford's business has been to declare himself the lover of Fanny, to make decided proposals for her, and to entreat the sanction from the uncle, who seemed to stand in the place of her parents, and had done it all so well, so openly, so liberally, so properly, that Sir Thomas, feeling moreover his own replies and his own remarks to have been very much to the purpose, was exceedingly happy to give the particulars of their conversation, little aware of what was passing in his niece's mind, conceived that by such details he must be gratifying her far more than himself. He talked, therefore, for several minutes without Fanny's daring to interrupt him. She had hardly even attained the wish to do it. Her mind was in too much confusion. She had changed her position and, with her eyes fixed intently on one of the windows, was listening to her uncle in the utmost perturbation and dismay. For a moment he ceased, but she barely had become conscious of it when, rising from his chair, he said, "And now, Fanny, having performed one part of my commission, and shown you everything placed on a basis the utmost assured and satisfactory, I may execute the remainder by prevailing on you to accompany me downstairs, where, though I cannot but presume on having been no unacceptable companion myself, I must submit you to your finding one still better worth listening to. Mr. Crawford, as you've perhaps foreseen, is yet in the house. He is in my room, and hoping to see you there." There was a look, a start, an exclamation on hearing this, which astonished Sir Thomas. But what was his increase of astonishment on hearing her exclaim, "Oh, no, sir, I cannot, indeed, I cannot go down to him. Mr. Crawford ought to know, he must know that I told him yesterday to convince him. He spoke to me on this very subject yesterday, and I told him, without disguise, that it was very disagreeable to me, and quite out of my power to return his good opinion." "I do not catch your meaning?" Sir Thomas, sitting down again. Out of your power to return his good opinion? What is all this? I know he spoke to you yesterday, and as far as I understand, received as much encouragement to proceed as a well-judging young woman could permit herself to give. I was very much pleased with what I collected to have been your behavior on the occasion. It showed discretion highly to be commended. But now, when he has made his overtures so properly and honorably, what are your scruples now?" "You are mistaken, sir," cried Fanny, forced by the anxiety of the moment to even tell her uncle that he was wrong. "You are quite mistaken. How could Mr. Crawford say such a thing? I gave him no encouragement yesterday. On the contrary, I told him, I cannot recollect my exact words, but I am sure I told him I would not listen to him, that it was very unpleasant to me in every respect, and that I begged him never to talk to me in that manner again. I am sure I said as much as that, and more. I should have said still more if I had been quite certain of his meaning anything seriously. But I did not like to be. I could not bear to be imputing more than it might be intended. I thought it might all pass for nothing with him." She could say no more. Her breath was gone. "Am I to understand," said Sir Thomas, after a few moments' silence, "that you mean to refuse Mr. Crawford?" "Yes, sir." "Refuse him?" "Yes, sir." "Refuse Mr. Crawford? Upon what plea? For what reason? I cannot like him, sir, well enough to marry him." "This is very strange," said Sir Thomas in a voice of calm displeasure. "Here is something in this which my comprehension does not reach. Here is a young man wishing to pay his addresses to you, with everything to recommend him, not merely a situation in life, fortune, and character, but with more than common agreeableness, with the dress and conversation pleasing to everybody. He is not an acquaintance of today. You have known him for some time. His sister, moreover, is your intimate friend, and he's been doing that for your brother, which I should suppose would have been an almost sufficient recommendation to you had there been no other. It is very uncertain when my interest might have got to William on. He's done it already." "Yes," said Fanny in a faint voice and looking down with fresh shame. And she did almost feel ashamed of herself after such a picture of her uncle had drawn for not liking Mr. Crawford. do not quite know your own feelings. Oh, yes, sir, indeed I do. His attentions were always what I did not like. Sir Thomas looked at her with deeper surprise. This is beyond me, he said. This requires explanation. Young as you are and having seen scarcely anyone, it is hardly possible that your affections... He paused and eyed her fixedly. He saw her lips formed into a no, though the sound was inarticulate, but her face was like scarlet. That, however, in so modest a girl might be very compatible with innocence. And choosing at least to appear satisfied, he quickly added, no, no. I know that is quite out of the question, quite impossible. Well, there's nothing more to be said. And for a few minutes, he did say nothing. He was deep in thought. His niece was deep in thought likewise, trying to harden and prepare herself against farther questioning. She would rather die than own the truth, and she hoped, by a little reflection, to fortify herself beyond betraying it. Independently of the interest which Mr. Crawford's choice seemed to justify, said Sir Thomas, beginning again and very composedly, his wishing to marry at all so early is recommendatory to me. I'm an advocate for early marriages, where there are means and proportion, and would have every young man with sufficient income settle as soon as 24 as he can. This is so much my opinion that I am sorry to think how likely my eldest son, your cousin, Mr. Bertram, is to marry early. But at present, as far as I can judge, matrimony makes no part of his plans or thoughts. I wish he were more likely to fix. There was a glance at Fanny. Edmund, I consider, from his dispositions and habits, is much more likely to marry early than his brother. He, indeed, I have lately thought, has seen the woman he could love, which I am convinced my eldest son has not. Am I right? Do you agree with me, my dear? Yes, sir. It was gently, but it was calmly said, and Sir Thomas was easy on the score of the cousins. But the removal of his alarm did his niece no service. As her unaccountableness was confirmed, his displeasure increased, and getting up and walking about the room with a frown, which Fanny could picture herself, though she dared not lift her eyes, he shortly afterwards, and in a voice of authority, said, "Have you any reason, child, to think ill of Mr. Crawford's temper?" "No, sir." She longed to add, "but of his principles I have," but her heart sunk under the appalling prospect of discussion, explanation, and probably non-conviction. Her ill opinion of him was founded chiefly on observations which, for her cousin's sake, she could scarcely dare mention to their father. Maria and Julia, and especially Maria, were so closely implicated in Mr. Crawford's misconduct that she could not give his character, such as she believed it, without betraying them. She had hoped that to a man like her uncle, so discerning, so honorable, so good, that the simple acknowledgement of settled dislike on her side would have been sufficient. To her infinite grief, she found it was not. Sir Thomas came towards the table where she sat, in trembling wretchedness, and with a good deal of cold sternness said, "It is of no use, I perceive, to talk to you. We had better put an end to this most mortifying conference. Mr. Crawford must not be kept any longer waiting. I will therefore only add, as thinking it my duty to mark my opinion of your conduct, that you have disappointed every expectation I had formed and proved yourself of a character the very reverse of what I had supposed. For I had, Fanny, as I think my behavior must have shown, formed a very favorable opinion of you from the period of my return to England. I had thought you particularly free from willfulness of temper, self-conceit, and every tendency to that independence of spirit which prevails so much in modern days, even in young women, and which in young women is offensive and disgusting beyond all common offense. But you have now shown me that you can be willful and perverse, that you can and will decide for yourself without any consideration or difference to those who have surely some right to guide you, without even asking their advice. You have shown yourself very, very different from anything that I had imagined. The advantage or disadvantage of your family, of your parents, your brothers, and your sisters never seems to have had a moment's share in your thoughts on this occasion. How they might have benefited, how they must rejoice in such an establishment for you is nothing to you. You only think of yourself. And because you do not feel for Mr. Crawford exactly what a young heated fancy imagines to be necessary for happiness, you resolve to refuse him at once, without wishing even and are in a wild fit of folly throwing away from you such an opportunity of being settled in life eligibly, honorably, notably settled, as will probably ever occur to you again. Here is a young man of sense, of character, of temper, of manners, and of fortune, exceedingly attached to you, and seeking your hand in the most handsome and disinterested way. And let me tell you, Fanny, you may live 18 years longer in the world without being addressed by such a man of half Mr. Crawford's estate, or a 10th part of his merits. Gladly I would have bestowed him on either of my daughters. Maria is notably married, but had Mr. Crawford sought Julia's hand, I should have given it to him with superior and more heartfelt satisfaction than I give Maria's to Mr. Rushworth's. For half a moment's pause. And I should have been very much surprised had either of my daughters, on receiving a proposal of marriage at this time, which might carry with it only half the eligibility of this, immediately and peremptorily, without paying my opinion or my regard the compliment of any consultation, put a decided negative on it. I should have been much surprised and much hurt by such a proceeding. I should have thought it a gross violation of duty and respect. You are not to be judged by the same rule. You do not owe me the duty of a child. But Fanny, if your heart can acquit you of ingratitude. He ceased. Fanny was by this time crying so bitterly that, angry as he was, he would not press the article further. Her heart was almost broke by such a picture of what she appeared to him, by such accusations so heavy, so multiplied, so rising in dreadful gradation, self-willed, obstinate, selfish, and ungrateful. He thought her all this. She had deceived his expectations. She had lost his good opinion. What was to become of her? I am very sorry, she said inarticulately through her tears. I am very sorry indeed. Sorry, yes, I hope you are sorry. And you will probably have reason to be long sorry for this day's transactions. If it were possible for me to do otherwise, she said with another strong effort, but I am so perfectly convinced that I could never make him happy, and I should be miserable myself. Another burst of tears, but in spite of that burst, and in spite of the great black word miserable, which served to introduce it to Sir Thomas, began to think a little, relenting. A little change of inclination might have something to do with it, and to augur favorably from the personal entreaty of the young man himself. He knew her to be very timid and exceedingly nervous, and thought it not improbable that her mind might be in such a state as a little time, a little pressing, a little patience, and a little impatience, a judicious mixture of all on the lover's side, might work their usual effect on. If the gentleman would but persevere, if he had but love enough to persevere, Sir Thomas began to have hopes. And these reflections having passed across the mind and cheered it, well, he said in the tone of becoming gravity, but less of anger, well, child, dry up your tears. There is no use in these tears, they can do no good. You must now come downstairs with me. Mr. Crawford has been kept waiting too long already. You must give him your own answer. We cannot expect him to be satisfied with less, and you only can explain to him the grounds of which that misconception of your sentiments, which, unfortunately for himself, he certainly has imbibed. I'm totally unequal to it. But Fanny showed such reluctance, such misery at the idea of going down to him that Sir Thomas, after a little consideration, judged it better to indulge her. His hopes from both gentleman and lady suffered a small depression in consequence, but when he looked at his niece and saw the state of feature and complexion which her crying had brought her into, he thought there might be as much lost as gained by an immediate interview. With a few words, therefore, of no particular meaning, he walked off by himself, leaving his poor niece to sit and cry over what had passed with very wretched feelings.
The intensity of Austen's writing in this scene is so well illustrated by that moment of sheer panic on Fanny's part when Sir Thomas comes close to uncovering her secret. But he backs off, and choosing not to pursue the possibility of cousins in love, that's a phrase from the very beginning of the book, his bewilderment at Fanny's decision turns to anger as Sir Thomas accuses her of willfulness self-conceit, and ingratitude for refusing Crawford, even before consulting with those by whom it is her duty to be guided. Sir Thomas's displeasure and the pressure he brings to bear on her increases Fanny's distress, but she remains determined to stand her ground, shattered though she is by his accusations. This painful scene, which we readers experience from Fanny's point of view, is unlike anything in Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth's parents' reaction to Collins's proposal becomes yet another joke. When Mrs. Bennet rushes into the library and tells her husband, "You must come, make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him," Mr. Bennet replies, "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do marry Mr. Collins. If you don't marry Mr. Collins, I will never see you again if you do." Fanny has yet another painful interview to endure, a private meeting with Henry, which Sir Thomas has promised him takes place that very evening. Instead of dramatizing the encounter between the two of them, Austen uses the opportunity to explore their thoughts and feelings. Jamie will read this section. Remember, it's the very same evening.
The conference was neither so short nor so conclusive as the lady had designed. The gentleman was not so easily satisfied. He had all the disposition to persevere that Sir Thomas could wish him. He had vanity, which strongly inclined him in the first place to think she did love him, though she might not know it herself, and which secondly, when constrained at last to admit that she did not know her own present feelings, convinced him that he should be able in time to make those feelings what he wished. He was in love, very much in love, and it was a love which, operating on an active, sanguine spirit of more warmth than delicacy, made her affection appear of greater consequence because it was withheld, and determined him to have the glory as well as the felicity of forcing her to love him. He would not despair, he would not desist. He had every well-grounded reason for a solid attachment. He knew her to have all the worth that could justify the warmest hopes of lasting happiness with her. Her conduct at this very time, by speaking the disinterestedness and delicacy of her character, qualities which he believed most rare indeed, was a sort to heighten all his wishes and confirm all his resolutions. He knew not he had a pre-engaged heart to attack. Of that he had no suspicion. He considered her rather as one who had never thought on the subject enough to be in danger, who had been guarded by a youth of mind as lovely as of person, whose modesty had prevented her from understanding his attentions, and who was still overpowered by the suddenness of addresses so wholly unexpected, and the novelty of a situation which her fancy had never taken into account. Must it not follow, of course, that when he was understood he should succeed? He believed it fully. Love such as this in a man like himself must with perseverance secure a return, and at no great distance. He had so much delight in the idea of obliging her to love him in a very short time, that her not loving him now was scarcely regretted. A little difficulty to overcome was no evil to Henry Crawford. He rather derived spirits from it. He'd been apt to gain hearts too easily. His situation was new and animating. To Fanny, however, who had known too much opposition all her life to find any charm in it, all of this was unintelligible. She found that he did mean to persevere, but how he could, after such language from her as she felt herself obliged to use, was not to be understood. She told him that she did not love him, could not love him, was sure she should never love him, that such a change was quite impossible, that the subject was most painful to her, that she must entreat him never to mention it again, to allow her to leave him at once, and let it be considered as concluded forever. And when farther pressed, had added, in that her opinion of their dispositions were so totally dissimilar as to make mutual affection incompatible, and that they were unfitted for each other by nature, education, and habit. and positively declared that he would still love and still hope. Fanny knew her own meaning, but was no judge of her own manner. Her manner was incurably gentle, and she was not aware of how it concealed the sternness of her purpose. Her diffidence, gratitude, and softness made every expression of indifference seem almost an effort of self-denial, seem at least to be giving nearly as much pain to herself as to him. Mr. Crawford was no longer the Mr. Crawford who, as a clandestine, insidious, treacherous admirer of Maria Bertram, had been her abhorrence, whom she had hated to see or speak to, in whom she could believe no good quality to exist, and whose power, even of being agreeable, she had barely acknowledged. He was now the Mr. Crawford who was addressing herself with ardent, disinterested love, whose feelings were apparently become all that was honorable and upright, whose views of happiness were all fixed on marriage, of attachment, who was pouring out his sense of her merits, describing and describing again his affections, proving as far as words could prove it, and in the language, tone, and spirit of a man of talent, too, that he sought her for her gentleness and her goodness, and to complete the whole, he was now the Mr. Crawford who had procured the Williams promotion. Here was a change, and here were claims which could not but operate. She might have disdained him all the dignity of angry virtue in the grounds of Southerton, or the theater at Mansfield Park, but he approached her now with rights that demanded different treatment. She must be courteous, and she must be compassionate. She must have a sensation of being honored, and whether thinking of herself or her brother, she must have strong feelings of gratitude. The effect of the whole was a manner so pitying and agitated, and words intermingled with her refusal so expressive of obligation and concern, that to a temper of vanity and hope like Crawford's, the truth, or at least the strength of her indifference, might well be questionable, and he was not so irrational as Fanny considered him, in the professions of perversing, assiduous, and not desponding attachment which closed the interview.
Fanny has many reasons to dislike Henry, but she also has reason to be grateful for his part in arranging William's promotion. Moreover, as he speaks of his affection for her, she is persuaded, or nearly so, of his sincerity. Compassionate by nature, she wants to be gentle in her refusal of him. Fanny doesn't realize that her every expression of indifference seems almost an effort of self-denial. And Henry doesn't realize that Fanny is in love with someone else. Is it any wonder that the interview ends in mutual misunderstanding? Henry may be a persistent and unwelcome suitor, but how unlike his courtship is from Collins's. For Fanny and Henry, so much is at stake. For Elizabeth, Collins, and the reader, nothing is. There are no caricatures in Mansfield Park. There are no characters entirely lacking in self-awareness, without any capacity for moral growth. And that includes Lady Bertram, Mrs. Norris, and Mr. Rushworth. Their self-awareness may be limited, but there are moments when the reader glimpses it. But what is most startling about Mansfield Park when compared to Pride and Prejudice is how richly developed are its characters. Edmund, Maria, Julia, Sir Thomas, Henry, Mary. Each one of these characters is complex. All of them must wrestle with their consciences. All are faced with choices that must seriously affect their own lives and those of others. But the most complex, the most richly developed character in Mansfield Park, in all of Austen's novels, I would argue, is Fanny Price, the quiet, timid, poor relation who is plucked from her own home at the age of 10 and sent to live with the family of her imposing and intimidating uncle. She is never treated as an equal, never shown any real kindness except by her cousin Edmund. But because she is never encouraged to speak up or take part in the life of the family, She listens. She observes. She reflects. Elizabeth is outgoing. Fanny is introverted. In the first part of the novel, Fanny says very little, but she sees everything. She is a young woman of both firm principles and passionate feelings. Careless readers, put off by what they perceive as Fanny's priggishness, often overlook her passionate nature. There are two people in Fanny's life whom she deeply loves: her brother William and her cousin Edmund. Up until this point in the novel, her feelings toward them are similar, for each an intense feeling of sisterly affection. One of Edmund's kindest acts toward Fanny is to arrange for her to have a horse to ride. Her health is delicate, and the exercise is good for her. But when Mary Crawford expresses an interest in learning to ride, Edmund asks Fanny if he can borrow her horse to give Mary a lesson. The first day all goes as planned, and Edmund returns the horse before it is time for Fanny's regular ride. But the second day, Edmund is late, and Fanny is waiting for his return. To avoid her Aunt Noris's scolding, Fanny sets out to look for him. Now, if you turn to your handout, the other side of your handout, there's one paragraph from chapter 7, which Jamie is going to read to us, and then I have some comments to make about it.
The houses, scarcely half a mile apart, were not within sight of each other, but by walking 50 yards from the hall door, she could look down on the park and command a view of the parsonage and all its domain, gently rising beyond the village road. And in Dr. Grant's meadow, she immediately saw the group: Edmund and Mrs. Crawford, both on horseback, riding side by side. Dr. and Mrs. Grant and Mr. Crawford, with 2 or 3 grooms, standing about looking on. A happy party, it appeared to her, all interested in one subject. Cheerful beyond a doubt, for the sound of merriment ascended even to her. It was a sound which did not make her cheerful. She wondered that Edmund should forget her, and felt a pang. She could not turn her eyes from the meadow. She could not help watching all that passed. At first, Miss Crawford and her companion made the circuit of the field, which was not small, at a foot's pace. Then, at her apparent suggestion, they rose into a canter, and to Fanny's timid nature it was almost astonishing to see how well she sat. After a few minutes they stopped entirely. Edmund was close to her, and he was speaking to her. He was evidently directing her management of the bridle. He had hold of her hand. She saw it, or the imagination supplied what the eye could not reach. She must not wonder at all this. What could be more natural than that Edmund should be making himself useful and proving his good nature by anyone? She could not but think, indeed, that Mr. Crawford might as well have saved him the trouble. It would have been particularly proper and becoming in a brother to have done it himself. Though Mr. Crawford, with all his boasted good nature and his coachmanship, probably knew nothing of the matter, and had no act of kindness in comparison of Edmund. She began to think it rather hard upon the mayor to have such double duty. If she were forgotten, the poor mayor should be remembered.
Thank you, Jamie. This is a pivotal moment in the novel. For the first time, Fanny and the reader begin to realize that her feelings for Edmund are more than brotherly, that they are different from her feelings for William. As she observes the happy party and hears the sound of merriment, a sound which did not make her cheerful, she wonders that Edmund should forget her and feels a pang. It is a pang of jealousy directed at Mary Crawford, and Fanny's jealous feelings build as Mary and Edmund circle the field, and she observes how well Mary rides. Then they stop, and Jamie read this sentence so well. Edmund was close to her. He was speaking to her. He was evidently directing her management of the bridle. He had hold of her hand. Notice the pulsating rhythm of these short clauses as her jealousy intensifies with each repetition of the word her. Then comes an astonishing moment of psychological insight on Austen's part. She saw it, or the imagination supplied what the eye could not reach. Does Edmund have hold of Mary's hand? Or, agitated by the awakening of her own physical desire, does Fanny merely imagine that he does? She tries to explain away what she thinks she sees by exonerating Edmund. It was his good nature, his desire to make himself useful, that explains his action. How different Edmund is from Henry Crawford, who, as Mary's brother, should be the one helping her. Fanny deftly shifts the blame to Henry, who lacks Edmund's active kindness. But is it active kindness that motivates Edmund, or is it, as Fanny pretends to deny, his sexual attraction to Mary? As she struggles with her feelings of envy and neglect, she tries to transform them into a concern for her horse. She began to think it rather hard upon the mare to have such double duty. If she were forgotten, the poor mare should be remembered. The bitterness behind this observation is palpable, and the tone of self-righteous martyrdom is uncomfortably similar to that of Mrs. Norris, who credits herself with putting the comfort of the horses before her own. You know how I always feel for the horses, as she describes to Sir Thomas Howe when accompanying Lady Bertram to Sotherton, she left the carriage and walked up Sandcroft Hill. I did indeed. I could not bear to sit at my ease and be dragged up at the expense of those noble animals. So much of Mrs. Norris's ill treatment of Fanny is motivated by jealousy, her worry that Fanny threatens her privileged position in the Bertram family. Here, Fanny's bitterness at Edmund's neglect suggests a similar sort of jealousy. Fanny's fear that Mary will replace her in Edmund's affectionate heart. This feeling surfaces again and again, as for instance at Sotherton, when Edmund and Mary wander off in the wilderness together, leaving Fanny unattended. Or when Edmund tells her that he has decided to take the part of Mary's future husband in Lover's Vows. Her heart and her judgment were equally against Edmund's decision. She could not acquit his unsteadiness, and his unhappiness under it made her wretched. She could not acquit her unsteadiness, and his happiness under it made her wretched. She was full of jealousy and agitation. As he draws closer to Mary, Edmund is completely unaware of Fanny's fond attachment and has no idea that she regards Mary as a rival. This is made very clear in a scene we discussed last month when first Mary and then Edmund come to the East Room to ask for Fanny's help in rehearsing their love scene. As Jamie reads this section, note the strength of Fanny's jealous feelings.
The morrow came, the plan for the evening continued, and Fanny's consideration of it did not become less agitated. She worked very diligently under her aunt's directions, but her diligence and her silence concealed a very absent, anxious mind. And about noon, she made her escape with her work to the East Room, that she might have no concern in another, and as she deemed it, most unnecessary rehearsal of the first act, which Henry Crawford was just proposing, desirous at once to having time for herself and avoiding the sight of Mr. Rushworth. A glimpse, as she passed through the hall, of the two ladies walking up from the parsonage made no change in her wish of retreat. And she worked and meditated in the East Room, undisturbed, for a quarter of an hour, when a gentle so obliged. I came here today intending to rehearse it with Edmund, by ourselves, against the evening, but he is not in the way. And if he were, I do not think I could go through it with him till I have hardened myself a little, for really there is a speech or two. You will be so good, won't you? Fanny was most civil in her assurances, though she could not give them in a very steady voice. Have you ever happened to look at the part, I mean, continued Miss Crawford, opening her book. Here it is. I did not think that much of it at first, but upon my word. There, look at that speech, and that, and that. How am I ever to look him in the face and say such things? Could you do it? But then he is your cousin, which makes all the difference. You must rehearse it with me, that I may fancy you him, and get all my degrees. You have a look of his sometimes. Have I? I will do my best with the greatest readiness, but I must read the part, for I can say little, very little of it. None of it, I suppose. You are to have the book, of course. Now for it. We must have 2 chairs at hand for you to bring forward at the front of the stage. There. Very good schoolroom chairs, but not made for a theater, I dare say. Much more fitted for little girls to sit and kick their feet against when they're learning a lesson. What would your governess and your uncle say to see them used for such a purpose? Could Sir Thomas look in upon us just now, he would bless himself, for we're rehearsing all over the house. Yates is storming away in the dining room. I heard him as I came upstairs. And the theater is engaged, of course, by those indefatigable rehearsers, Agatha and Frederick. If they are not perfect, I shall be surprised. By the by, I looked in upon them 5 minutes ago, and it happened to be exactly at one of the times when they were trying not to embrace, and Mr. Rushford Worth was with me. I thought he began to look a little queer, so I turned it off as well as I could by whispering to him, "We shall have an excellent Agatha. There is something so maternal in her manner, so completely maternal in her voice and countenance." Was that not well done of me? He brightened up directly. Now, for my soliloquy. She began, and Fanny joined in with all the modest feelings which the idea of representing Edmund was so strongly calculated to inspire, but with the looks and voice so truly feminine as to be no very good picture of a man. With such an annult, however, Miss Crawford had courage enough. And they got through half the scene when a tap at the door brought a pause, and the entrance of Edmund. The next moment suspended it all. Surprise, consciousness, and pleasure appeared in each of the 3 on this unexpected meeting. And as Edmund was come on the very same business that brought Miss Crawford, consciousness and pleasure were likely to be more than momentary in them. He too had his book and was seeking Fanny to ask her to rehearse with him and help him to prepare for the evening without knowing Miss Crawford to be in the house. And great was the joy and animation of being thus thrown together, of comparing schemes, and sympathizing in praise of Fanny's kind offices. She could not equal them in their warmth. Her spirits sank under the glow of theirs, and she felt herself becoming too nearly nothing to both of them had any comfort in having been sought by either. They must now rehearse together. Edmund proposed, urged, and entreated it till the lady, not very unwilling at first, could refuse no longer, and Fanny was wanted only to prompt and observe them. She was invested, indeed, with the office of judge and critic, and earnestly desired to exercise it and tell them all their faults. But from doing so, every feeling within her shrank. She could not, would not, dared not attempt it. Had she been otherwise qualified for criticism, her conscience must have restrained her from venturing a disapprobation. She believed herself to feel too much of it in the aggregate for honesty or safety in particulars. To prompt them must be enough for her, and it was at sometimes more than enough, for she could not always pay attention to the book. In watching them, she forgot herself, and agitated by the increasing spirit of Edmund's manner, had once closed the page and turned away exactly as he wanted help. It was imputed to be very reasonable weariness, and she was thanked and pitied, but she deserved their pity more than she hoped they would ever surmise. At last, the scene was over, and Fanny forced herself to add her praise to the compliments each was giving the other, and when again alone and able to recall the whole, she was inclined to believe their performance would, indeed, have such nature and feeling in it as must ensure their credit and make it a very suffering exhibition to herself. Whatever might be its effect, however, she must stand the brunt of it again that very day.
Thank you, Jamie. Jealousy is not an attractive trait. nor is the self-righteousness that often accompanies it. Fanny understands this all too well. She must daily endure their ugly side effects in Mrs. Norris's treatment of her, and much of the novel focuses on her attempts to overcome those feelings. For a sensitive young woman so deeply in love, it is a struggle that requires all the moral strength she can command, a struggle whose outcome is always in doubt, a struggle that sets her apart in complexity and interest from even so richly drawn a character as Elizabeth Bennet. I shall now turn you over to Rachel, who will continue to explore the depths of Fanny's character and the pleasures of reading Mansfield Park.
Thank you, David. Whenever anyone asks me what my favorite Jane Austen novel is, I always say the one I'm reading right now. Truly, Austen's writing is so beautiful and so compelling that each of her books contains a captivating world of its own. However, when we consider the chronology of her books, we can see a marked progression in her writing as she herself grew in age and maturity. She began what would become Sense and Sensibility when she was 19 and what would become Pride and Prejudice when she was 20. Though she revised each of these books later, when Jane Austen sat down to write Mansfield Park at the more mature age of 35, her choice of story and heroine shows a decided departure from Pride and Prejudice. Sure, she could have easily satisfied the 18th century appetite for more Elizabeth Bennet-type chick lit novels. She could have perhaps written books like The Devil Wears Muslin, or Elizabeth Bennet's Diary, or Shopaholic Takes Brighton. But Austen was not the type to repeat the same thing twice. She had a lively mind and a prolific imagination, as well as a seemingly endless supply of characters, plots, and ideas to explore. From the young and lively Catherine Morland to the pragmatic and reserved Elinor Dashwood, from the witty and independent Elizabeth Bennet to the older and wiser Anne Elliot, Austen's writing spans every personality type and maturity level in terms of both her characters and her plot lines. While Pride and Prejudice perhaps delivers one of her most entertaining and popular novels in terms of zesty personalities and witty banter and sexual chemistry, it is in the everyday lives of the characters of Mansfield Park that we encounter an altogether different Austen, one who is more serious, introspective, and thoughtful. In Mansfield Park, Austen's writing is rich and mature. Fanny herself is perhaps the most well-developed heroine of Austen's books. Finally, the plot is detailed, dramatic, and controversial. Mansfield Park is not the work of a witty young prodigy. It is the work of an older, wiser, more mature Austen. Let's first take a look closer at the writing itself. As we have heard from David, the complex characters in themselves say a lot about her writing, but now let's focus on the pacing of the novel. While Pride and Prejudice romps along at a fast clip, has short bursts of dialogue and concise descriptions of its characters and their actions, Mansfield Park walks at a slower pace, has longer passages of dialogue, and is more comprehensive in its descriptions. This slower, more deliberate pace allows Austen to develop every part of the novel more fully. Each and every character and each and every plot line is evidence of the time and commitment to her craft that Austen put into the novel. In Mansfield Park, Austen covers a longer time span, covers more ground in each portion of the novel, and goes into more detail than in Pride and Prejudice. The result is a rich experience for the reader. First, Austen covers a longer time span in Mansfield Park than in most of her other novels, producing depth and beauty. For instance, while Austen places us immediately into the main action of family life in the Bennet family in the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice, the first line of Mansfield Park starts with the words, "about 30 years ago." Austen delves into the Bertram family carefully and purposefully, building a foundation for the rest of the book. Also, most critics agree that Pride and Prejudice spans just about a year of time. Mansfield Park, on the other hand, starts with Fanny coming to Mansfield Park at the age of 10, picks up again when she is 15 and runs until she eventually gets married. Austen gives a full chapter to the history of the family and how Fanny came to be at Mansfield Park. She gives another full chapter, 10 pages, to Fanny as a 10-year-old. In no other novel does Austen give us more than a glimpse of a heroine as a child. Even in Sense and Sensibility, where she gives a chapter to explaining the family history of the Dashwoods, we are introduced to Eleanor when she is already 19 years old. The first 2 chapters of Mansfield Park create quite the backdrop in Austen terms. The pathos that is generated by the amount of time that the reader spends learning about Fanny as a young girl allows the reader to understand Fanny more fully and thereby enter into her joys and sorrows more intensely. Surely this is Austen flexing her writing muscles. In addition to the time span Austen covers in the novel as a whole, the amount of ground covered in each portion is also intense, revealing Austen's remarkable abilities as an experienced author. By the time Volume 1 closes, we have witnessed 2 of the most dramatic portions of the novel, the Southerton outing and the home theatricals. In comparison, Emma's climactic Box Hill outing comes in Volume 3. And Elizabeth Bennet goes to Pemberley in Volume 3 of Pride and Prejudice. In Emma, we don't even meet Frank Churchill until Volume 2. In Mansfield Park, not only do we meet Mr. Crawford by Chapter 4, we have seen him at work, we have watched him work his charms on both Bertram sisters, and we've been given a glimpse into what makes him tick before we even get to the second volume. By the close of Volume 1 of Mansfield Park, the reader feels spent. So much water has passed under the bridge. We know each character intimately. We are aware of the intricacies and foibles and weaknesses of each person, and we understand the dynamics of each and every relationship. This is quite a setup for the rest of the novel. If we compare even the first few chapters of Mansfield Park to the first few chapters of her other novels, we see that Austen held nothing back as a writer. In pacing Mansfield Park in this way and laying so much groundwork, Austen allows the reader to fully understand the complexities of the plot and each character. Finally, there is an attention to detail in Mansfield Park that is on a whole new level from Pride and Prejudice. Take, for instance, even just the pages given to the opening chapters of Pride and Prejudice in Mansfield Park. Chapters 1 and 2 of Pride and Prejudice are each 2.5 pages long. It makes for a glorious, quick-paced, fun-filled setup. In comparison, chapters 1 and 2 of Mansfield Park are 8.5 and 10.5 pages long, respectively, as Austen slowly builds a foundation for her characters and fleshes out the entire background of the dysfunctional Bertram family. This is Austen stepping into a new phase as a writer. Finally, the depth of detail in this novel is also seen in the way that Austen allows us to view the main love interests. While in Emma, we see Frank Churchill primarily when he is with Emma or when other characters talk with him about him. And likewise, we normally only see Darcy when he is with Elizabeth or when others are talking about him. We get to witness scenes of Mary and Henry Crawford at home. We get to visit their drawing room and listen in on their discussion of conquests, flirtations, and the various eligible Bertrams. We thus get to know both characters more intimately and are able to understand why they do what they do. Seeing what Mary is like when she is around Edmund versus what she is like when she is around Fanny versus what she is like when she is with only her family is eye-opening and exquisite for the reader. Knowing what Mr. Crawford truly thinks about women makes the reader squirm even more as he flirts with first one Bertram sister and then another. These insider details bring so much more drama and angst to the plot because Austen allows the reader to understand her characters and their motives more intimately. Austen doesn't merely tell us about the secondary characters in this novel. We get to see them in action even behind closed doors. This marked level of detail combined with the large time span the novel encompasses and the amount of ground that is covered in each section shows that Austen truly was at her best as a writer when writing Mansfield Park. It is a mature work with mature characters and mature plots. Next, let's look more closely at Fanny, who I argue is one of Austen's most endearing and most well-developed heroines. I'm the last to want to argue with Austen herself. She wrote, quote, "I must confess that I think her," Elizabeth, "as delightful a creature as ever appeared in print." She's right. Elizabeth is delightful. She is Austen's most popular character. As far as personality, Elizabeth outshines most heroines. She always says what we want her to say, and she always does what we want her to do. She is able to bring justice to her own situation. However, I argue that in Mansfield Park, Austen explores beautifully the adolescence, growth, and young womanhood of one of her most overlooked, misunderstood, and unsung heroines. In sitting down to write about Fanny Price, Austen took on a new kind of woman, one that shrinks from the spotlight, prefers intimate conversations over large groups. She's shy. She might be perhaps what we might call introverted. Some of us might be able to relate to that. When it comes down to pure heroine power, many people prefer Pride and Prejudice over Mansfield Park because they simply prefer Elizabeth over Fanny. However, while Fanny does not immediately jump off the page or over styles like Elizabeth Bennet, she is the kind of character that gets better with every page turned. To know Fanny truly is to love Fanny. Like the very cast of characters around her, the reader who takes the time to become acquainted with the girl in the corner is richly rewarded. Now, many times we as modern readers do not immediately love Fanny because in comparison with some of the larger-than-life heroines like Elizabeth Bennet and Emma Woodhouse, we find Fanny too reserved, emotionally cold, and too quiet for our taste. We wish she would just speak up for herself once in a while. As a whole, the painfully shy, easily tired, overlooked character does not immediately grab our attention. But, of course, Austen writes Fanny this way for a reason. When it comes to her being overly reserved, the careful reader will soon find that whenever Fanny disapproves of something, it is usually for good reason. For example, when she is unwilling to be part of the home theatricals with her cousins and their friends, it is not because she does not like to be entertained or because she does not want to join in. In fact, it is quite the opposite. She is unwilling because she knows her uncle would surely disapprove. In this case, Fanny is not being too straight-laced. She is, in fact, quite as laced up as her uncle would like all the girls in his house to be. She is a woman with strong morals who feels keenly the impropriety of her cousins. Though quiet, Fanny can smell trouble when it is brewing. In terms of lacking emotion or passion, I argue that it is actually the fact that Fanny is so full of emotion and passion that she is so uncomfortable in her life at Mansfield Park. When her horse is used for 4 days together and she is not being properly considered, Fanny is described as feeling neglected and struggling against discontent and envy for some days. This is not a tin woman with no heart. This is a real girl with all the same longings and struggles as any other. When the man she loves shows affection for another, she is crushed. When her uncle misunderstands her, she is heartbroken. When no one notices her needs, she is forlorn. Fanny longs to be loved, needed, and heard. When you place a shy, intelligent, feeling young girl without fortune into a house of affluence, treat her as the low-bred cousin she is instead of as a daughter, and make her feel very pointedly the inferiority of her status each and every day for years on end, the result will most certainly be a young woman who is quiet and introspective. As the fair-minded reader soon finds out, Fanny is anything but lacking in feeling. Now, when it comes to Fanny speaking up for herself, this is simply not possible or proper in most cases. For much of her time at Mansfield, she is not invited to be a full-fledged member of the family. Sir Thomas pays her little attention for the first half of the novel. Aunt Norris reduces her as best as possible to errand girl and lady's maid, and Lady Bertram only has eyes for her pug. Fanny has been made to feel inferior for most of her life at Mansfield Park. She's been brought up to understand her place and never forget it as far as concerns her Aunt Norris. Fanny has never been given the ability to make her own choices, the ability to approach her uncle and guardian freely and without fear, the permission to make travel arrangements as needed to visit her parents or siblings, or the ability to speak up in family debates. She is frequently overlooked and misunderstood, and because of all this, she is quiet. And though she is naturally a quiet person, she is more so because of her environment. So she carefully avoids the people and problems that trouble her as best she can. She finds peace and solitude in the refuge of her rooms. In truth, the one thing Fanny truly lacks is confidence. Austen says that, quote, "Since the day at Southerton, Fanny could never see Mr. Crawford with either sister without observation, and seldom without wonder or censure. And had her confidence in her own judgment been equal to her exercise of it in every other respect, had she been sure that she was seeing clearly and judging candidly, she would probably have made some important communications to her usual confidant." Best of all, though Fanny does not immediately sparkle off the page like Elizabeth Bennet or preside over the neighborhood like Emma Woodhouse, she is the kind of character who only gets better with close acquaintance. She is someone who, if you truly want to know her, requires a closer look. In choosing to write about a complex set of characters with a shy heroine at the center, Austen did something daring and exquisite. She wrote a story in which the reader falls in love with the main character slowly and carefully, much like the characters that surround her. The more Mary Crawford invites Fanny to visit, the more she enjoys her company. The more quiet evenings she spends with Fanny at her side, the more Lady Bertram finds she cannot spare her. The more her uncle gets to know her, the more he admires her. Even flirtatious Henry Crawford can't help but fall in love once he sees how pretty she has grown and realizes what a fine character she really has. And the more time Edmund spends with Fanny as a young girl, the more he realizes her lovely potential and her sweet personality, and the more time they spend together when she is a young woman, especially under the trees in summer, the more he sees someone to love. And just like Edmund, Mary, Sir Thomas, and Henry, the more time we spend with Fanny, the more we fall in love with her steady, quiet, loving, and attentive ways. In her own words, quote, "I suppose I am graver than other people. The evenings do not appear long to me. I love to hear my uncle talk of the West Indies. I could listen to him for an hour together. It entertains me more than many other things I have done, but then I am unlike other people, I dare say." Fanny is not boring. Fanny is not lacking in personality. She is a thinker, and she is an observer. She is the kind of person in whom one could find a good friend and a confidant. She may be unlike Austen's other characters, but she is not unlikable. And now, finally, let me tell you why Mansfield Park is surely Austen's most dramatic and controversial of plots. This is my top 10 things Mansfield Park does better than Pride and Prejudice. If Austen's writing hasn't persuaded you, and the beauty and depth Austen gave to Fanny hasn't persuaded you, perhaps if we focus on the drama and controversy in this novel, it will give you a greater enjoyment of Mansfield Park. Not only is Austen more mature in her writing in this novel, her subject matter is more mature as well. I would rate it OM for oh my. Mansfield Park boasts the greatest underdog story, the most scandalous scandals, and the best you reap what you sow payoffs in all of her fiction. When it comes to a complex cast of characters and a lot of hijinks, Mansfield Park steals the show. Number 1, Mansfield Park has the best display of jealousy in all her literature, played out to the bitter end. There is enough jealousy in this novel to power a locomotive. First, there's the obvious jealousy between Maria and Julia as they compete over the affections of Mr. Crawford. This jealousy eventually leads to one sister's ruin. Second, there is the less obvious jealousy of Aunt Norris toward Fanny. As Fanny begins to take a more central place in the family later on in the novel, Mrs. Norris becomes more and more hateful toward her, mainly because she can't stand to see Fanny favored. Number 2, the best display of unreserved, unrestrained, intentional flirtation in all of her books. The scenes between Maria and Mr. Crawford and Julia and Mr. Crawford are downright scandalous. They reveal some of Austen's best writing under the clever cover of pleasantries, covert digs, and false sentiments, both girls shamelessly throw themselves at Mr. Crawford, who unabashedly flirts right back. They all appear to be perfectly proper, but are playing with fire. The best example of the brashness in their flirtation between Mr. Crawford and Maria is in the chapel at Southerton, when Mr. Rushworth and Maria are found to be standing near the altar. Quote, the rest of the party being scattered around the chapel, Julia called Mr. Crawford's attention to her sister by saying, do look at Mr. Rushworth and Maria standing side by side, exactly as if the ceremony were going to be performed. Have they not completely the air of it? Mr. Crawford smiled his acquiescence and stepping forward to Maria, said in a voice which only she could hear, I do not like to see Miss Bertram so near the altar. Starting, the lady instinctively moved a step or two, but recovering herself in a moment, affected to laugh and asked him in a tone not much louder, if he were to give her away? I am afraid I should do it very awkwardly, was his reply, with a look of meaning. Third, the best and most twisted love triangles. We have the Fanny, Edmund, Mary triangle. Then we have the Mr. Rushworth, Maria, Mr. Crawford triangle. Then the Maria, Mr. Crawford, Julia triangle. And most scandalous of all, we have the Mrs. Rushworth, Mr. Crawford, Fanny triangle. Austen does not write these triangles merely to tug at our heartstrings, but to show the character of each person in each triangle. Many a true nature comes to light as each triangle progresses. Number 4, the best intrigue and scandal. We have elopements, affairs, divorce, oh my. This is perhaps one of Austen's raciest novels in terms of the content. From let's go romp in the wilderness together without a chaperone to let's throw a home theatrical party while daddy's out of town. This book is full of controversy. This is Austen's only novel in which a married primary character has an affair, is disowned, gets divorced, and is sent away. Number 5, the best and funniest airhead couch potato in the history of the English novel, Lady Bertram and her pug. Her one claim to fame is her beauty. She marries, has children, and then spends her days on her couch with her pug doing nothing. She even has to ask her husband what she thinks of things. And she only begins to think of Fanny as pretty once she is assured that others think so too. Number 6, the best villain. You most likely assume I'm talking about Henry Crawford. No, I refer to Mrs. Norris. No better or more despicable character can be found to compare in all of Austen's writing. Austen proved her genius when she wrote Mrs. Norris. She actively works against the happiness of Fanny throughout the novel and encourages gross impropriety in both of her nieces. She is continually reminding Fanny of her place, saying, remember, wherever you are, you must be the lowest and the last. Upon my word, Fanny, you are in high luck to meet with such attention and indulgence. You ought to be very much obliged to Mrs. Grant for thinking of you, and to your aunt for letting you go. And you ought to look upon it as something extraordinary, for I hope you are aware that there is no real occasion for your going into company in this sort of way, or ever dining out at all. And it is what you must not depend on ever being repeated. Nor must you be fancying that the invitation is meant as any particular compliment to you. The compliment is intended to your uncle and your aunt and me. Mrs. Grant thinks it is a civility due to us to take a little notice of you, or else it would never have come into her head. And you may be very certain that if your cousin Julia had been at home, you would not have been asked at all. Vicious woman. Number 7, the best comeuppance. The two most hateful and spiteful characters in the novel end up right where they should be, together. Quote, it ended in Mrs. Norris's resolving to quit Mansfield and devote herself to her unfortunate Maria, and in an establishment being formed for them in another country, remote and private, where, shut up together with little society, On one side, no affection, on the other, no judgment, it may be reasonably supposed that their tempers became their mutual punishment. Number 8, the best relationship. Whereas Pride and Prejudice has the kind of heart-pounding love story we all enjoy, Mansfield Park has the slow, budding, building story of a man who finally realizes that everything he's been looking for in a wife is standing right in front of him. The romance between Fanny and Edmund is all about unrequited love, fully satisfied. It is that best friend turned lover story that we all believe in is one of the most mature love affairs of all of Austen's fiction. Theirs is a marriage that will surely stand the test of time. It's based on true friendship, mutual admiration, and complementary personalities. As Fanny attests, she hardly dared believe her dream could come true. Number 9, the best love story. And it's not the one you're thinking about. I refer to Sir Thomas and Fanny, where they each found the father and daughter that they never had. Though theirs is a relationship that begins with years of sternness on one side and timidity and fear on the other, when he comes home from Antigua, Sir Thomas becomes softer toward her. He's eager to see his dear Fanny and even looks for her in the family group specifically. And even through the terrible disagreements they have over Mr. Crawford's proposal, in the end, he respects her firmness in refusing. Later, once he realizes that she was right about Mr. Crawford, and he sees how his own daughters are full of vanity and vice, he appreciates Fanny for all that she is and finally embraces her fully. Austen tells us, quote, Fanny was indeed the daughter that he wanted. His charitable kindness had been rearing a prime comfort for himself. His liberality had a rich repayment, and the general goodness of his intentions by her deserved it. He might have made her childhood happier, but it had been an error of judgment, only which had given him the appearance of harshness and deprived him of her early love. And now, on really knowing each other, their mutual attachment became very strong. After settling her at Thornton Lacey with every kind attention to her comfort, the object of almost every day was to see her there or to get her away from it. And number 10, the best payoff. Austen really makes us work hard for the happy ending in this book, but it's worth it. Fanny is finally shown the love and affection that we as her readers know she deserves by the people she loves most. We finally get to see Fanny grow up and blossom into everything we knew and hoped she could be. And she finally takes her rightful place at the center of the family unit and is appreciated for who she is. No longer a poor, orphaned relation, but truly a valued and respected part of the family. In truth, it is neither fair nor possible to compare Pride and Prejudice and Mansfield Park. Each novel is unique and beautiful in its own way. Each shows a side to Austen that we can appreciate and enjoy. However, after taking this closer look at Mansfield Park today, I hope you have found a place in your heart for the complex Bertram family and the kind, compassionate Fanny Price. Because really, aside from all the family drama and controversy, this book is, at the heart, about Fanny. Fanny is truly Austen's mature woman. She is who she is from beginning to end. Her tastes and understandings deepen and grow, but her character and personality always stays the same. She is constant and steady, just as she should be. Yes, she is quiet, but she knows her own mind. It is really not a matter of character change that is needed in Fanny's case, as in so many of Austen's other heroines. It is a matter of environment change that is needed. Fanny is the beautiful hothouse plant that has been left out in the elements. With a little encouragement and the right climate, she blossoms. Given the love and consideration she needs and deserves, she becomes confident and she steps into her rightful place as a beloved daughter, sister, niece, wife, and friend. Mansfield Park is not for the faint of heart. Enjoying it involves a time commitment, a dedicated mind, and an open heart. But like all of Austen's novels, and like sweet Fanny Price herself, It is a novel well worth our time, our consideration, and our hearts. Thank you.
Well, we spent two sessions making our case for Mansfield Park with the help of Jamie and Ryan. We've got 5 minutes for any questions and comments, if you have any, or if you're exhausted, we can just quit. Yeah.
Well, I did find it a little bit of a hard slog, but I'm glad I stuck with it because the character development was incredible, like you said. But like Henry, I mean, do you think he really loved her, or was it the thrill of the conquest? You know, the two sisters were so easy, but Fanny she was a tough nut, and I just wondered, and then later for Mary to say, Fanny, if you just accepted him, he never would have run off with Mariah. I mean, that whole Mary's revealing herself at the end was fascinating to me. For Edward to
Go ahead.
finally see her.
I think it's probably a little of both. I don't know. I wonder if he liked the idea of thought that he could be in love and liked the idea of, doing something good with his life, perhaps, and being a changed man. So yeah, probably a little bit of both. But obviously, I always think in that passage, it's pretty evident that part of it is the thrill of the chase. She's a hard get.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that I found so surprising at the very end was that the author says that perhaps in time she really would have changed her mind and grown to love Henry. And I was so surprised at that because, I mean, she made this point that there was no way that Fanny would ever change her mind. And then at the end, Austen sort of opens the door that maybe she could have. And I thought that was sort of jarring.
Can I take a crack at that one? That's really interesting because my wife and I have spent all week arguing about whether there's any possibility, there might be any possibility that she would end up marrying Henry. And of course, the only possibility would be if Edmund were first to marry Crawford. And I think there is a softening somewhat of her attitude toward him, as for instance when he visits her at Portsmouth. My wife doesn't agree with that, and she wasn't aware, however, of that statement at the end of the book because she was listening to the book on a tape, and the tape was defective, and she never got to hear the last week. But at any rate, one of the things that makes this book so great is the ambiguity there. I mean, we could argue about that forever. That's part of what makes the book so wonderful, and the characters so complex. They're not cut and dried. They're not easy to figure out.
How would you compare Fanny to Anne in Persuasion and to Eleanor in Sense and Sensibility?
That's yours.
Them.
Yeah, I think about that. Even as I wrote this, I thought about those two characters a lot because Anne is very mature, obviously, and I think her character is really well developed as well. We get to know her, and we see that she's been through a lot in her life, and she's obviously matured as a result. And for Eleanor, I tend to think in some ways she's kind of had to grow up pretty quickly, with a mother who doesn't have the most sense. So she's kind of had to grow up pretty quickly in that sense. And I actually I see a lot of differences, especially I think between Anne because she's lost her confidence, and we see Fanny lacks confidence. So I see that tie. Eleanor doesn't seem to lack too much confidence. But
yes.
That answers.
Yeah.
I'm going to toss you a grenade. I think the most interesting thing about the whole book
Is what? I'm sorry.
It does not work. It does not fly. I do not believe that Henry Crawford would have behaved that way. He's a cold, calculating guy, and if you think about it from his perspective, he would never have done Mariah like that. Because if he'd succeeded, he would have been permanently in her power. And he knows she's reckless, and she knows she might spill the beans just because she's not paying attention. She might spill the beans to try to force him to marry her. She might spill the beans to ruin his chances with Fanny. He would never have done that. When I got to that part of the novel, I went, "Oh, come on!" Mary would not have said those things in front of everyone. So what I thought was fascinating about the book was she developed these characters so completely that they got out of her control. The story was going someplace she didn't want it to go, and it was falling for Henry Crawford. And that's what I think is the most interesting thing about the book. Do Austen experts ever talk about this?
This is a great way to end. And I just want to vote here. How many of you agree with him that Crawford would not have acted that way? That he would not have thrown away Fanny for the sake of
Especially not in cold blood.
Uh,
He could not have planned this thing 2 weeks in advance. He's too smart.
weak.
So how many of you agree with that? How many of you think it's in character what he does? Well, pretty quite a split. Again, my final point is that's what I find so intriguing and so wonderful about this book, among many other things, is there's so much to argue about it because we're dealing with real characters who we can't know completely, who don't always act consistently, who have struggles, who have hopes and fears. And my own view is that Henry Crawford, his big weakness is he lacks self-discipline. I think he truly loves Fanny. I don't think there's any question about that. So why would he do this? Because Mary's made a point of his attending this party, and by golly, he can't turn down the opportunity. But I.
Maybe she throws herself naked at him in the night. I don't believe he can do that in cold blood. He would not put himself in her power like that. I just can't believe it.
Yeah.
And I think Austen didn't believe it either, because see how fast she closed that novel? I just couldn't get away from this ending fast enough.
I can't find my quote.
She let other pens dwell on.
I'm sorry?
She let other pens dwell on misery and guilt.
Yes, right. Austen often makes fun of convention at the end of her novels. The problem with novels is they have to end, but life goes on. And that's a dilemma that every writer faces. Okay, we run out of time. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jamie.